Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all for hanging with me on this Wednesday. So if you've been watching my content for very long, you know I talk about a jig a lot. Summertime, flipping that big 1 ounce jig in the grass. In the spring, I use it around shallow wood. And then this time of year, I'm looking for vertical structure to catch bass on a jig. Now, what I talk about in every one of my jig videos is how inconsistent a jig is. Now, if you're fishing for your personal best or you're in a one-day tournament, I think a jig is your best option for consistently winning tournaments and catching giant fish. Now, if you're going to be fishing a multi-day tournament or you're trying to catch fish on a jig every day of the week, you're probably going to run into some hurdles along the way. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to throwing a jig. So I want to talk about this time of year, what will get you in trouble on a jig, because the problem with the jig in the fall, especially as we get further on where the bass are all on the bait fish, they're moving around, they're traveling, you don't necessarily see a whole lot with the jig unless they are loaded on something like a dock or bluff walls, to where it's a high percentage type place. You didn't have to look around a whole lot to find that channel swing bank up against the main river, or that isolated dock that's sitting perfectly there where bass could be swimming there, and as long as it hasn't been hit a whole lot, could be the perfect place to catch a giant bass or catch a big bag of fish. Now, the problem is that in itself, these are high percentage places that not only attract bass and lots of them, but also a lot of fishermen along the way. So my issue with a jig this time of year, when you think you figured it out, you found them loaded along that bluff wall, and you're just going to go back there and catch them tomorrow, there may be 2 or 3 boats on that. Well, I'll run to the next channel swing bank. You go down the lake quarter of a mile, and there's another boat sitting on it. So these are obvious type places. And the same thing goes with docks. The same thing goes with, any place where you can catch a fish this time of year on a jig, is that most people know about those spots, especially the locals. They don't even have to know what they're doing to know that I always catch a fish in November on a jig on that spot. So if you're on a pattern, or if it's not even a pattern, you still could run into people on those type places. So that's why I stray away from a jig. And I think a lot of good fishermen stray away from a jig as well in this situation, because it's just not consistent. Some of my best friends say, hey man, I got to learn how to fish a jig and throw it as much as you do. And then I tell them, well, I've had a lot of really bad tournaments on a jig as well. So it's got to take the good with the bad, or the bad with the good in this case. But that's just something that I've dealt with a whole lot this time of year. And again, when you're out there looking for fish, and maybe they're on a flat, maybe they're on a vertical bank, covering water with something subsurface or even a top water is going to be a much better option. When you find them loaded, it's okay. And then I will also say this, like my buddies who are really good fishermen who don't ever throw it, you can be that guy too. You don't necessarily always have to fish a jig. I've gotten my butt whooped when I was on a pretty good jig bite by a drop shot, a Texas rig, and even in these colder months, even in the pre-spawn, right before they're about to spawn, or in the month of November, where I was catching them on a little compact jig around bluff walls, I got whooped pretty bad with a drop shot. So if you're a drop shot guy, I wouldn't say to get too far away from the drop shot when you're fishing vertical structure in this part of the year. Now, let's talk about a couple of different jigs that I like to throw in this situation, because it's not so much about flipping. You're more so fishing structure this time of year, so it's going to be more of a dragging bite. So a compact tungsten jig is a must. Bluff wall, steeper banks, riprap banks, anything where you're sitting in like 15 feet or deeper and you're throwing to the bank, I like a compact tungsten jig. So a 1/2 ounce is going to be a really good size. That's going to be able to feather down the side of the wall. 1/2 ounce is enough weight, even when it's just a vertical type bank. So bluff walls, 1/2 ounce compact jig. Now, they're not always going to be on that type of structure. They're going to be close to deep water. So what you will find, especially on the Tennessee River, is we have shell beds that may be in a foot of water right next to the main river channel. So I really like this in the month of November, December, January, February, when you have some fish that are relating to that main river channel, the current, but they're going to get pushed up on those shell bars. And they're not always going to be in a foot of water. I like that 3-foot shallow type bar situation and a structure jig. This is actually a Tight Lines wood thumper. If you see that head, very similar to a Strike King structure jig, which is a really good jig all year, and especially this time of year. It's a good jig that you can swim back to the boat if you're feeling that. Fishes really well around docks, and then it's just a great dragging jig. So if you want to put it on a little bit lighter line, fish it out a little bit deeper, that's going to be perfect. Now, back to what I was saying about those shallower bars, you can even go down to these really small structure jigs. Like this is a quarter, and I'll throw it up in 3 feet of water and just drag it back. And there's still a little bit of grass left on the bottom, so you don't want to put too heavy of a jig on there. So that quarter, you're almost swimming it on the bottom, it seems like. But throw it up there on that shell bar and just kind of fish it off. The jig is magical when it's on. So there's days when it seems so easy, you can't believe that they're going to get off it. And then there's days where you'll spend half your day not catching anything to realize that, oh, they didn't get on the jig today. But the days where they are, I like to throw it up on that shell bar, and you can fish it right off the side of it. And then once you get it off the side of the bar into the channel, pick it up and throw it back out there. But this is one of those baits where they're just not biting anything else on those shallow bars. They don't want a moving bait. They want something just sitting there. It's too shallow to really throw a jerk bait. That's why I really like these structured jigs. And again, very versatile jig that you can pretty much fish in every situation. Now, I wouldn't be throwing a quarter if it was any deeper than 2 or 3 feet, but this head design is just a really good place to start when it comes to a lot of different scenarios in jig fishing. So I think it's very important always to be careful, but when you find them loaded on a place, that jig is going to go in there and mop them up better than anything else. So try that this time of year, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.